and action.
Hello, this is Seth from the Travel Smith Co. podcast. Welcome back. Hey, today we are going to discuss hostels, what they are, some pros and cons with them, and just kind of some expectations that are worthwhile to have as you are looking at a budget trip. It is very often a cheaper option, one of the cheapest options for lodging, and so that is essentially a pillar for any traditional budget travel. And so first off, we're just going to start with a brief description of what a hostel is. I have not really looked into this before I started traveling, and so I think a lot of people, if they have not traveled, also are unaware of what these are. And so these are typically lower cost, lower amenity lodgings. Sometimes they have private rooms like a hotel would. Most often, though, they are most well known for having dormitory style rooms. Anything from 4, 6, 8, 12. Occasionally, some will even have more than that. Bunk beds in a room. So you might have a room that has 6 bunk beds in it, so it sleeps 12 people. Is very common, and then they would all have just a shared bathroom. Depending on the hostels, it might be a shared bathroom for the whole floor, it might be a shared bathroom for that one particular room. So there's a lot of variety in what hostels are, but the backbone is that they are mostly dormitory style lodgings that can either be a dormitory for men, a dormitory for women, or a dormitory for mixed gender. And then they typically have shared bathrooms and a shared common area with also a usually pretty well equipped kitchen within the hostel as well. And so those are a very popular way to travel, a place to stay while you're traveling, especially in very dense urban areas because of the property costs and the location. There's only so much you can get downtown, but often you can more economically fit people into a hostel situation. If you have people who are willing to share a room with 10 other guests, it is cheaper than if you are either sharing a room with one other person in a private room or if you want a room by yourself. So it is a more traditional budget style accommodation. They are very popular throughout a lot of the world, less so in the United States than elsewhere, but Europe, the Middle East, Asia, Australia, they're all very popular ways of staying while you are traveling. So there's a few different options within that. There are the dormitories, as I mentioned, that can either be single gender or mixed gender. There are, in some, they also have private rooms where maybe there is a single person room, a 2-person room, up to maybe a 4-person room. It all depends. There could be some that have more, but typically a one person to 4-person room are what are available if you select a private room in a hostel. And then you can also look for some that have in-suite bathrooms, which just means that they have a bathroom on the private room like a hotel would. And so there are a wide range of those. Something to keep in mind if you're traveling solo, the dorm is going to be the cheapest option almost always. However, if you have one or more travel buddies, it is definitely worth looking at the private rooms. It is not uncommon for a 2-person room to cost about the same as 2 beds in a shared dormitory. And so I have done that before, where there have been times where I have stayed in dormitories, and then there have been times where I have been traveling with a buddy and we found that it was cheaper or about the same price to have a private room for the 2 of us, where we had a little more privacy, obviously, but we also had more of a spot that we could spread out. We didn't have to worry about our stuff being on the floor. We didn't have to worry about leaving our bags or luggage in the room. Most of the dormitories, it is very common to have a small locker near your bunk bed that you would put your own padlock, or maybe buy a padlock or rent a padlock from the hostel. So you would keep your stuff locked away in a private locker. However, if you have a private room, that's not as big of an issue. And so that is something that is worth considering if you are looking at a hostel. If you're traveling by yourself, it's going to be most economical to be in a dorm, but if you have more than one person, definitely search and see if there are private rooms available and see how they compare for the price. And that's not a hard and fast rule. I've had times where I have traveled with other people where it was more economical for us to all stay in dorms, and there have been times where we have stayed in private rooms. So it's a case-by-case basis, but it is worth looking into to see what is best for the specific trip. And so for hostels, one of the main sources that I go to, I will often visit hostelworld.com or use the Hostelworld app on my phone. And so you can go there, search your city that you're going to stay in, search your dates. It'll show you what hostels are available. If you are staying in a larger city, there are most likely multiple options. And so then you can sort through what is the best one for you. The first thing I always do from Hostel World is I always prefer to sort by ratings. So part of how Hostel World makes its money is they have hostels that pay them, and so the higher that they pay, the farther up they place them on their search algorithm. But you can get around that simply by sorting the hostels based on their rating, with the highest rated first. And so that is something that is worthwhile. They do a rating out of 10 for that. I would rarely consider staying at a hostel that is rated less than an 8. And that is personal preference for myself. Everyone has some different things with that, but they do those ratings based on quite a few different scoring systems that people who have stayed there have ranked it. Various things like location, how close it is to the sites, the old city, if it's in Europe maybe, the culture of the hostel, how well the living area is set up, if there's maybe a pool table or board games or books, whatever there is, something that you can do at the hostel. If there are other travelers who are around and friendly and are all mingling together and hanging out together, is another rating system. The safety is a rating on there that is definitely worth looking into, how safe it is based on the location of the hostel, based on the door locks, the lockers within the rooms, all of those things. And then also things like facilities, how good the bathrooms are, how good the doors are, all of those things combined together. And so they will give a total score based on the sum of those, or based on the average of those ratings. And so that is a worthwhile thing to do. I always sort based on the highest rated hostels and start from there. And then we'll also look at prices. And I am doing that and just kind of explore that a little bit. I mentioned the hostel atmosphere or culture a little bit as one of those ratings. So that is something that is very important to know, is that there is an atmosphere and culture within hostels. So a lot of backpackers, a lot of budget travelers, there is a sort of camaraderie for a lot of people that are there, people doing similar lifestyles that are adventurous, wanting to go out and do things. And so there is, for many hostels, not all, but many hostels, a kind of a get together at the end of the day. It's not scheduled or anything, but like as people are coming back, if they're hanging out in the common areas and they just chat up whoever happens to be coming in. And I have met people in spots like that. It's not uncommon to meet people and decide the next day you're going to go somewhere together because maybe it's more cost effective to share a taxi to go to this site that you're both interested in seeing. So it's a cheaper way to do that. To get ideas of other things to do. Maybe you meet somebody who's just come back from an amazing experience from an event or a location that you've not even heard of. It's just a good clearing ground to share ideas, to share experiences, both good and bad, things to do, things to not do. And so it's a really kind of a cool vibe, especially if you are a solo traveler and wanting to be able to go out with people and spend some time with people and just kind of discuss your plans, get pros and cons of different events, different things to do, different things to see with other people who have done that already, or go and share experiences with people who are traveling solo like yourself. So that is another important aspect of hostels, is there is kind of a camaraderie there where a lot of people will like to do things together. So that is a little bit of what a hostel is. Some expectations that I would kind of give you for that, just to have some realistic views on these. So I have had both very good and very bad experiences in hostels. I was staying in a shared dorm, and so we were all hanging out in the common room, and one of the guys and one of the girls who were both staying in the dorm started drinking a little bit and getting a little bit friendlier than we wished they would, and so some of us were nervous that they were going to go and start causing problems in the shared dorm with us, which was not a really relaxing way to spend the night. So that was not a great experience. We had another time at a hostel in Australia where we actually were staying in a private room, but somebody had been given a wrong key card and was actually given a key card to our private room and just opened the door at probably 2 a.m. Immediately realized they were in the wrong place and shut it, but it was just a little bit of a start waking up at 2 a.m. to someone opening the door and then hastily retreating when they realized that they were not in the right place. So that is something that can happen. It's also not uncommon. As weird as it sounds, given all of the things I've just discussed with the atmosphere and the camaraderie between people, at the same time, you always get those random people who are just kind of not really thinking about anybody outside of themselves. There was a time I was in a shared dorm, and so I was in a bunk. It's very common for the bunks to have their own night lights and their own power sources because you need to charge your phone or whatever while you're sleeping. And so I had an early morning train the next morning, so I was trying to go to bed, or I did go to bed somewhat early, and around 11 o'clock that night, maybe midnight, another guy who was staying in there came into the room, flipped his light on, just flopped on his bed and started blaring music out of his phone with no headphones or anything like that, and so just playing loud music throughout the dorm in the middle of the night. And so there are things like that that happen, and that's just part of the charm of hostels. In most cases, it can be significantly cheaper to stay at a hostel versus a hotel. It is not uncommon for a dorm in a hostel to cost maybe 20% or so of what a hotel room would cost, and so it can be significant savings over the long term, or even for a few nights can add up quickly as well. Some good experiences I've had. Me and my travel buddy were staying at a hostel in Scotland one time that had been an old cathedral from probably the 1800s, maybe 1700s, a very large old brick cathedral that had fallen into neglect, and somebody had purchased the cathedral and turned it into a hostel, and it was a really cool place to stay. We had a private room there. It was a very nice room, and so just the whole experience there was a really nice place to stay that was a little bit outside of town, or outside of the old town, still well within the city, but a 20-minute walk or so from there, and just a beautiful stay and a really cool setting for that. We had another experience where I got to stay at a hostel in Australia in the Blue Mountains. It felt as though you were staying, if you were to have an Australian grandmother, it felt like you were staying in her house, maybe in like the loft or something. Just a really cool atmosphere and vibe, and some quilts and all the things that really felt like you were staying at a grandmother's house in Australia. There was another time that I was backpacking through several countries, taking train through several countries in Europe, and had found a hostel in a small village in Austria. And so this hostel was a 15th century farmhouse that had been maintained and then converted into a hostel. And so for that case, I bought a bed in a dormitory because I was traveling solo, and there ended up not being anyone else there. So I ended up having the entire room to myself and staying in this several century old farmhouse. And each morning there was fresh baked bread and homemade jam for breakfast that was included with the stay that they brought in each morning. So there are some really cool places you can stay, some really cool experiences you can have. And sometimes it turns into a good experience, and sometimes it is not as good of an experience, but it almost always is a cheaper option for you.
Jillian here. The 3 hostels Seth mentions having great experiences at are linked in the description. If you click the link and decide to book any one of them, we may earn a commission at no extra cost to you. Thanks so much for supporting the podcast.
Some of the pros, some of the cons. Overall, hostels are significantly cheaper very often, especially if you're willing to stay in a dormitory. Sometimes the private rooms are cheaper, sometimes they are not cheaper than staying in a hotel or an Airbnb. It is very much a case-by-case basis. So as I mentioned before, you have to look at the cost versus the convenience. If you're willing to look at the different options, lose a little bit of the convenience, do a little bit more work, you can see is an Airbnb, as a hotel, as a hostel, the best for me if I'm staying in a private room, or is it worth the convenience to pay the costs to not stay in a dorm? Is it better to stay in the dorm that is not convenient and save the money and then I can spend it either on traveling somewhere else or a different activity on my trip, or just to even make the budget for the trip work to be able to take the trip at all, to save the money and stay in a dormitory. So definitely have to keep the cost versus convenience in mind whenever you're looking at hostels. Another pro for the hostel, another way that you can save a lot of money, is that almost all of them have shared kitchens. And so by doing your own cooking, going to a grocery store, buying some simple foods and cooking there, you can save a lot of money. Whether it's every meal or a meal a day or whatever the case is, you can save a lot of money by cooking your own food and preparing your own food versus eating out. In a lot of cases, that is another way that you can save money by staying in hostels. Another pro for the hostels is that, not always, but there is a good chance that they are in a good location. So because it is more economical to house people in dormitories, they can afford sometimes the higher cost of being in the prime real estate of the tourist areas. This isn't always the case. I've stayed in hostels that were in the dead center of Old Town and chose them not because I needed to save money, but because the location was better. And so that was a good way to be where I wanted to be in the city, was to stay in the hostel. It's not always the case, but there is a chance that the hostel can be in a very good location because of the style of lodging and the economical way of hosting more people in a small space that way. Another and final pro for this is that hostels can be a great way for meeting people if you're traveling solo. So it is just a good option to have if you want to travel solo but not necessarily be by yourself the entire time. You can make friends, you can get advice, you can maybe have travel buddies to go do day trips with you, whatever the case may be. That's definitely a good thing to consider whenever you're looking at hostels. A couple of cons is hostels are not usually known for being high quality. They are the budget option, and they very often feel like they are the budget option. It is not always the nicest thing to share a room with 16 other people in a dorm. Additionally, sometimes I said that the hostels are in very good locations. Sometimes they are not. Very often you might have to have a hostel that is 20 or 30 minutes walk or farther outside of the main tourist attractions, outside of the Old Town, or whatever the case may be for that. Even though sometimes it is not in a great location, it is still worthwhile staying in a hostel for the cash saved. Once again, keeping in mind cash versus convenience on that. Another con for hostels, or at least a possible con, is having shared facilities. Sometimes it's not a problem at all. Sometimes the shared facilities are nice because you will have a more full kitchen, you will have a larger bathroom, you'll have more options in that. However, sometimes the shared facilities are not as nice because they are being used. And so they are either being used and not well maintained by those who have just used them. Maybe they clean up after themselves well, maybe they do not. And so that is definitely a con. It is a potential con, I should say, in that there might have to share facilities of either the kitchen, the shower, or the toilets. It is not uncommon for there to be specific rooms for toilets and specific rooms for showers. Sometimes they are together. However, I would also recommend, if you are going to stay in a hostel, to always bring shower shoes with you, just a pair of flip-flops that you could wear if you're going to share shower house with a bunch of other people who are traveling. I would always recommend having flip-flops with you for that. The final con is that because it is a very budget place to stay, that you have to look each individual hostels, depending on which room you get. A lot of them, if you do a dormitory, do not include things like towels. A lot of them will have towels for rent. Sometimes you have to bring your own towels. Many of them have linens for the beds. However, you have to look because not all do. Some expect that it is going to be mostly backpackers who stay there, who bring their own sleeping bags. And so there would be some hostels that might not have linens on the beds. You would have to rent them as well. And so those are all things that you need to look at, be aware of. Almost all of them, you could rent linens, you could rent a towel, you could buy a padlock for the locker that you need to put your bag in. But those are all things that add up in price. And so those are all things that need to be considered whenever you're looking at the cost analysis of staying in the hostel. So those are just a few different things that are pros and cons about hostels, kind of hopefully giving you a bit of an idea of the basics of what a hostel is and some expectations that you could have for staying in one, a couple of tips for finding them, and just some general tips for things you should consider whenever you are looking at staying in a hostel versus more traditional lodging like a hotel or something like an Airbnb. And so I hope you guys have enjoyed that. I hope it is useful to you. Check out hostelworld.com or the Hostel World app if you are interested in looking at hostels for any potential trips you're looking to take in the near future, or if you just feel adventurous and want to see what is available in different parts of the world. So those are all some good things to keep in mind. Go have a fun time exploring some hostels, and we'll see you next time on the Travel Smith Go podcast.